Almost 200 years before same-sex marriage would be recognized in the U.S., two women were laid to rest under a single tombstone in Weybridge, Vermont, just like any married couple. In honor of Pride Month, we're learning about the lifelong romance of Charity and Sylvia today on Across the Fence. Hello, Vermont. The headstone of Charity Bryant and Sylvia Drake is muted stone gray, but its meaning is as vibrant and beautiful as a rainbow flag. Here lie two women who, for 44 years, shared the trials, tribulations, joys, sorrows, and successes of everyday life. What did that life in 19th century Vermont look like? That was what my guest today wanted to know, and so the new graphic novel, Charity and Sylvia, was commissioned. Joining me to talk about it is Christopher Kaufman-Ilstrup, the Executive Director of Vermont Humanities. Founded in 1974, the nonprofit organization is a state affiliate of the National Endowment for the Humanities, dedicated in part to inspiring a lifelong love of reading and learning. Christopher Kaufman-Ilstrup, welcome to Across the Fence.
Thanks for having me.
It's wonderful to have you here. So let's start with Vermont Humanities. I gave a very brief overview there. Tell us about what you do.
Sure, yeah. We are, as you noted, the state affiliate of the National Endowment for the Humanities in Washington, D.C., as well as the Library of Congress, in fact. And our mission in Vermont is to work with Vermonters all over the state to engage the public in the humanities, writ large. We like to say these days that's any two people working together in a room to try and make their community a better place. Yeah. So we do that through work with literature, with history, with philosophy, with the classics, as well as just conversations about everyday life. Yeah. And Charity and Sylvia is a lot about everyday life.
Charity and Sylvia is such a beautiful story from everyday life. Yeah. And so you also, part of the things that Vermont Humanities does, so you maintain a speakers bureau, and you have the Vermont Book Awards, there's Vermont Reads. Like, what are the different types of programs that you run?
Sure. Yeah, Vermont Reads is our one book, one state reading program. Many people know us for that. It happens all over Vermont. The most recent book, The Light Pirate, had 109 community projects across the state in every county. We also run a speakers bureau that's taken advantage of by a lot of historical societies and libraries around the state. We make grants to small grassroots community projects all over the state. So if you're going into a historical society or a house museum somewhere in Vermont, probably they've gotten support from Vermont Humanities at some point in time. We run humanities camps in the summertime for young people, primarily for middle school students. And we do a lot of early literacy training as well, which is something that is a little quieter. Most people don't know about that, but we train literally hundreds of early educators every year in how to bring the humanities, how to bring literacy into early care for the littlest Vermonters.
Yeah. Such an absolute important mission, and the humanities have not had the easiest go of things in the, in our national climate maybe for the past many years. So
our current moment has been a little bit difficult indeed. The National Endowment for the Humanities is struggling, struggling right now, but we keep the faith and we keep moving forward.
That's good. Okay, so how did all of this mission lead you to the story of Charity and Sylvia?
Well, I've known about Charity and Sylvia for a long time because I grew up in Virgins. And so the Sheldon Museum, which holds the Charity and Sylvia archive, is in Middlebury, just down the road.
Just down the way.
And Charity and Sylvia are from Weybridge, which is just 6 miles from the house that I grew up in.
Yeah, this is so close. This is all of this. Like, all of these markers are so close. I mean, in my life here in Burlington, same. I'm like, I know Weybridge, I know Middlebury, all these little places.
Yeah.
Love Virgins.
Yeah, and so, the Charity and Sylvia archive was actually really undiscovered until the early aughts, when a woman named Rachel Hope Cleaves started researching a book about Charity Bryant's nephew, William Cullen Bryant.
The poet.
The poet and abolitionist. And she found in his writings a description of his aunts, Charity and Sylvia, and who they were. And that started her on a quest to learn more about who these women were, which ultimately resulted in the first book called Charity and Sylvia, which is her academic history of the archives that she found at the Sheldon Museum in Middlebury, where they had largely been unknown for many decades.
That's amazing. Well, tell us a little bit more about them, because these are two remarkable and lovely women.
Sure. Charity and Sylvia were both born in Massachusetts. Charity was born in 1777, which is one of the reasons why we're so excited about them this year. It's the 250th anniversary of the United States. it's also about to be the 250th anniversary of Charity.
Yeah.
They moved to Vermont. Sylvia's family moved first to Vermont largely to kind of start again, as many immigrants and migrant families did, leaving Massachusetts shortly after the Revolutionary War, moving up to Vermont. Charity came a little bit later. She was trying to escape maybe a little bit of a reputation.
Yeah, you get the sense of it in the book.
Yeah,
Yeah.
in Massachusetts. And she met Sylvia in 1807 in Weybridge when she came to visit her friend Polly. And they were never apart ever again.
That's
for
amazing.
44 years.
Yeah.
There's evidence that they were apart when Charity went back to Massachusetts for about 1 month, but otherwise they spent every single day together for 44 years after they met.
Yeah, and we get to see all of that unfold in this book. And now I said that you commissioned the graphic novel, which I think is probably a little bit overly simplistic.
Yeah.
How did it come about?
Yeah, it's a little overly simplistic. What we did was we approached Tillie Walden, who wrote the book, and told her about this story and said, do you have any interest in this? And it literally took about 2 minutes of talking before Tillie said, I'm in, I want to do it. And then I don't think she really quite knew what she was getting herself into. But we were able, through Vermont Humanities, to provide her with a grant to do some of the early research. We didn't ask her to promise us that there would be a book. We hoped that there would be a book. But really, we just wanted her to explore the idea. So we gave her a grant. We gave the Sheldon Museum a grant for their time working with Tillie. And very quickly, they decided, yes, there would be a book.
Yeah.
And not only would it be a book, it would
Yeah.
be a big book.
Yeah, well, and so now from all of that, what I also gather is you always did envision it as a graphic novel, because
Yeah.
you didn't approach a writer and say, you know, like, let's write a historical nonfiction narrative or something. How did you know that a graphic novel was the right way to go?
Yeah, you know, as a humanist, I've always been really interested in comics as a tool for civic engagement, as a tool for teaching, learning, building community. And this really, it goes back, there's a long tradition of comic books as popular education tools. They particularly comes out of Latin America. But here in the United States, one that we often talk about is the comic book of Martin Luther King and the Montgomery Story from the 1950s, which really sort of launched this idea that you could use comic books to teach history and to teach, in that case, community organizing, right, nonviolent organizing. And so that's been a part of my own research interests over the years. And I knew that really the best way to get this story out was through a comic book.
Yeah, well, something that it does really effectively. So for example, like one of the things that Tillie did is that it's broken up into parts, and in each of the different parts then it's situated historically. So she tells you who the president is, she gives a little bit about what's going on in Weybridge, you know, just enough detail about what's happening to keep us moving through time historically. And I thought that was really effectively communicated through illustration. What did you think?
Yeah, I think that's amazing, actually, and the way that she was able to provide that larger context of what the American story is really effective. Because it tells us that Charity and Sylvia's story is part of the American story. Right? There's an effort, I think, frequently to take queer people out of the American story, and that is not what's happening here, right? Charity and Sylvia are part of the American story. The other thing that I think is important to say is that that Tillie really talks about the abolitionist movement in the book, and talks about the indigenous Abenaki people who were already, of course, in Vermont for thousands of years prior.
Yeah. Well, tell us a little bit about the research that she did. So she worked with the book from 2012, and what else did she do in order to help really understand the story?
She drove from her house in Norwich over 2 mountains every week to the Sheldon Museum for about 2 years. And she learned how to read these crazy letters and diaries that exist in the archive. There's Sylvia's diaries in these crabby, you know, old cursive handwriting that nobody knows how to read today. She learned how to read it. She read 900 letters including many, many letters from Charity's ex-girlfriend, Lydia Richards, who's a character in the book. A lot of letters from Reverend Eli Moody, who was their pastor and a very close friend of theirs. Charity and Sylvia were involved as leaders in their church all the way through, which is another thing that people often don't think about.
Well, you know, question, is that, do you think that's one of the reasons why after both of their deaths that the decision to be, to bury them under one tombstone was something, was it contested? I mean, do we know anything about that, or was it just something the community understood them as a married couple?
The community understood them as married, and their family understood them as married, right?
That's
so they buried them under one tombstone. That was a family member who made that happen, right? Probably a niece or a nephew. And it was a niece or a nephew that saved all those letters and gave them to Henry Sheldon, where they were put in the archives, right? So they were known and understood to be a married couple. They were called by everyone Aunt Charity and Aunt Sylvia. And a beautiful thing about their story is that they not only supported themselves, right? They had their own business, which was very unusual.
Right.
But they trained a lot of young women as apprentices in tailoring. And they had over 100 nieces and nephews in that community.
You get a sense of this very big family. Well, we're almost out of time, but I do want to say, so the book is part of Vermont 250, and you're going to come back and we're going to talk a little bit more about Vermont 250. It's the reading selection for it. Just real fast, how does this fit into Vermont's Revolutionary Era history, this story?
Yeah, you know, Charity and Sylvia are really the first generation after the founders. Right, so Charity was born, as I said, in 1777. Sylvia was born about 8 years later. And so their story really is the American story.
Yeah, they're growing up with the Republic.
They're growing up with this, with our country.
That's amazing.
And I think that is a big piece of why we felt like it was important to tell their story now, this year.
Yeah, this year. Okay. Well, so you can learn more about Vermont Humanities and Read Vermont on their website. The link is right there on your screen. We've also included a link to Tillie Walden's website about the book, where you can learn more about the research process and how she brought to life 19th century Weybridge. It's really, now there's some great maps and things like that in the book, like illustrations of the town. So gorgeous. Christopher, where can folks get the book?
It's published tomorrow, actually, June 16th.
Incredible.
So you can get it in bookstores anywhere. Certainly at Phoenix, at Norwich Bookstore, that's Tillie's home bookstore.
Wonderful.
Anywhere in Vermont.
Okay, it's going to be a great read. Thank you so much for joining me. And as always, thank you, Vermont, for learning and exploring with me today. And thanks to the team that makes Across the Fence possible. I'm Amy Finley. This is Across the Fence. Come back and let's learn and explore again tomorrow.